My next guest is Craig Randall. He is a repeat guest who was on episode number 58 back in 2020. He is a developer and author of Trust-Based Observations, an Amazon #1 bestseller in 5 countries. Craig has spent the last 30 years in education work as a counselor, coach, teacher, and principal. Craig spends the majority of his time training school leaders in trust-based observations, building mastery, and transforming the world of teacher observations to a model of trust and support that fosters growth mindsets, cultures of trust, and creates collective teacher efficacy in action. In addition, Craig speaks at conferences, is working on a new book, and hosts the 20 Minutes of Teaching Brilliance on the Road with Trust-Based Observations podcast, where he and some amazing teachers he observed engaged in meaningful dialogue about what makes for good teaching and learning. Welcome to the podcast again, Craig.
Thanks, Dana. Great to be back. I'm glad we get to catch up.
Yeah, well, it's exciting to see where you're at with your consultancy now and some of the things that you can share from what you've learned in the past 5.5 years you've been consulting. So, first of all, I'll have you share a new trench story, maybe from the past 5.5 years. So, tell me about a time when you were in the trenches and managed to crawl out.
Um, now my work is more helping the leaders go, and I, it's a good question because, like, I'm not in the trenches in the exact. I'm out there with with school leaders and teachers, and I'm getting to see it. I'm not living it all in the exact same way that I did before as a principal, and so I think that part has changed some, but I think. Sometimes when we switch from the way we've been doing observations,
Hmm.
Danielson Marzano self-ID way that we've been doing it for the last 25 years, even though the research says it's not improving teaching and learning, it's
Hmm.
really all people know. And so sometimes there is resistance, even though you know it's not working because it's what's familiar. And so to break out of the
Hmm.
chain of what's familiar can be challenging. And I think one of the things that it's maybe a bit of a cumulative story is that it's not uncommon for leaders when we're training them at the beginning of the week to have some level of skepticism. And one of the areas that they'll have
Hmm.
some skepticism about is that there's exceptions, like if you're a new teacher, but we do not offer suggestions right away because trust takes time. And without trust, it's harder for people to really embrace growing. And
Hmm.
so people will, you'll feel that and they'll say, but like we saw this, what are we going to fix this? And I always just say, look, it takes time. It doesn't happen right away. And
Hmm.
if we ask too soon, the trust isn't there. We're not going to see the needle move. And so, one of the things that we always tell them is we're playing the long game. What we've been doing for the last 25 years isn't working. So, if I see you once every 3 or 4 weeks now, and we wait till the fourth time, it's only been 10 or 12 weeks. But if it before it wasn't working, but now it's going to work, then why not wait? And so it's pretty common to have there's some angst because they'll see something that they think needs to be fixed now. And so I remember early on when we were starting to train schools, because before it was just me doing it. Now I'm out showing people how to do it. We were in Wales actually, and it was a Wednesday morning, and I could tell on Monday and Tuesday there was some real apprehension about like, but this is wrong. We need to fix this.
Hmm.
And then on Wednesday morning, one of the school leaders came in and she said, Craig, I woke up at 3 in the morning and I was dreaming, and I woke up with this phrase in my head, playing the long game, playing the long game. And
Hmm.
it just clicked. Like we have to play the long game. We have to build trust together. And then the whole team, and we see this fairly regularly. When we observe traditionally, when we have to
Hmm.
put ratings on you, we start to look at you through a deficit mindset. And
Hmm.
it's just, it trains you to look at that. And it's harder for me to help you grow when I'm looking at what's wrong. But
Yeah.
when I start to go from a strengths-based focus and look at what's right, all of a sudden everything changes and it's so much easier for me to help you grow once I see what's right. And with
Hmm.
that group in particular, but then it was so often with our groups, it flips like on Wednesday, and now they see what's really good about their teachers. And then
Hmm.
it's so much easier for them to wait and have the patience to do it. So that's kind of a cumulative in the trenches story. And then once that light bulb comes on, then they understand. Maybe they're out of the trenches, as it were.
So after you've worked with the school and they have this light bulb moment and then they start to maybe focus more on the strengths-based approach. Do you circle back with those schools, and are they continuing to focus on the strength-based approach, or do they happen to go back into the focusing on what's wrong?
They don't go to what's wrong. I mean, you of course you notice what's an area where you could grow in, but that's
Mhm.
different than looking about what's wrong. And people don't go back to it because the teachers' reactions are so dramatically different.
Okay.
Like when when I know I'm getting a score of, the 1 to 4 rating score that we're getting, so often, even if I'm saying good things, they're not hearing it because all they're thinking is, what's my score going to be? What's my score
Yeah.
going to be? But when I take that out, because we don't rate pedagogy, and we just share the observations and we ask the questions instead, so it's about you and from a strengths-based perspective, and then
Hmm.
you see teachers, and it's so regular, you will hear teachers say, it feels so nice to hear what I'm doing well. Nobody ever tells me what I'm doing
Hmm.
well, or, oh my gosh, my bucket being filled. This is so great. And so when you see that as a school leader, when you sometimes see tears of joy in comparison to what they've been doing before, when you see even the first round, the walls come down, the protective walls come down enough that teachers say, I'm already thinking about what to get better at without you seeing anything, like
Hmm.
you would never go back. So it
Yeah.
just doesn't happen that people go back because it's like a light bulb moment for me to see my teachers be happier. And all of a sudden, observation, sometimes something that was a drudgery because I didn't want to give scores, now is fun. So why would I ever want to go back to slipping into like looking at what's wrong? I can look at what I can do to help you grow, but my lens changes permanently.
Hmm. Hmm. So tell me a little bit about how trust-based observations has grown in the past 5 years or so, and also how you're working with schools in helping implement this despite what state or district rubric
Yeah.
they might use.
Sure. I mean, before, like when we met, like I hadn't even been on the road, right? It was COVID. So
Yeah.
the book came out and I couldn't do anything. So really it was just I'd put on paper what the model that I'd somehow accidentally developed was.
Hmm.
And then now, over the last 5 years, we've been able to put it into action. And so they're 1 week trainings on site at your school, and it's mastery training where we go over, we observe over and over and over again. We have a reflective conversation over and
Hmm.
over again. We go over what we saw together over and over again. So by the end of the week, you're super solid in it. And so it's really evolved to like being able to put what I had in my head into practice, but you see the same effect every single week. You see the building turn into a culture of trust in a
Hmm.
single week. And so really what we do now is we go out and we train those schools week in and week out. And then as far as the state laws piece, that is complicated. And
Hmm.
I'd be lying if I didn't say we get more work with charter, independent, faith-based, or international schools because they're not as confined
Hmm.
by the state rules that really require some form of Danielson or Marzano or a variant.
Hmm.
But what we do is we realize, like long term, the goal is to change the laws, but that's
Hmm.
not going to happen overnight. So in the meantime, how are we legally compliant? Yet are
Hmm.
we able to build trust in the way that we are? Because the research shows when I put ratings on pedagogy, that's one of the biggest things that inhibits and ruins trust and causes teachers to play it safe. And so it varies by school that we work with, but there's lots of ways we can make it work. Generally, though, most states have some kind of a pattern where once I'm not a new teacher anymore, I have my comprehensive evaluation once every three to
Hmm.
five years and then some kind of a focused area the other years. And so many of the schools we work with just say when it's a focus area, let's choose something that's not pedagogy, like professionalism, because then
Hmm.
that's easy. And now we can spend our time just doing trust-based observations, what we want to
Hmm.
do. And so
Hmm.
that's what many schools choose to do. And then when they have the comprehensive year, they'll do it some ways and just say, okay, look, we don't really want to do this because we know TBO works better, but we have to. And so
Hmm.
then they'll decide different ways to do it. Some will say, let's just agree to call everything proficient, except with maybe somebody that I'm concerned about. Some say, look, I just have to do it. Some say, I'm going to be your TBO person this year, but this person is going to be your evaluator that year. And so you separate it out in any way you can. Some people keep the traditional one open, and when it's a good observation that ticks all the boxes, they use that. And so just we find pathways to make sure we are being legally compliant because that's the rule and the law, while we're doing our best to make sure it doesn't inhibit what trust-based observation is all about, creating that trust so teachers will take those risks.
Hmm. Talk to me a little bit about the framework in terms of the gains that you see in schools and teacher retention. Um, Also, maybe just the relationships teachers are building with their students.
Well, and I think that last one is really important because if we want our teachers to create our students to be risk takers, healthy risk takers in
Hmm.
practice, as observers, we ought to be creating the same conditions for our teachers. And the way we traditionally do it does not really create those conditions. But in trust-based observations, we tell the teachers the goal is for us observers to create enough trust so I can come into your classroom, observe you, see you trying something new, and even though it's not likely, have that thing you're trying be a disaster. But as opposed to a traditional observation where you'd be freaking out that this was happening, you won't be
Hmm.
because you know the next day, the first thing I'm going to say when I come into your classroom is, Dana, I love it that you were trying something new. Because when you know those conditions to exist, that you could try something, have it go bad, and know you're going to be praised, what will you do?
Hmm.
You'll keep trying new things. And so we think by modeling that with teachers, we're allowing that to model for students as well. Can you repeat the rest of the question again so I can get the pieces I missed?
Yeah, talk to me a little bit about how it has helped transform maybe the
Oh yeah,
growth in
okay.
the schools, the gains
Yeah.
in ELA and math.
Yeah. So, depending on the schools we're at and how long we've been there, it takes a while to get data, and then private schools have different data. But we have I'll give you one example. We have a district we worked with in California, and they after TBO training, and then they had a full year of training between the standardized California standardized tests.
Mhm.
Their math scores year over year, kids that reach proficient rose by 7.25%, and their
Mhm.
ELA rose by 12.75%. So that's our strongest example. And
Mhm.
regularly we'll just hear stories about like people want to stay because they feel
Mhm.
supported. And like you'll get people in testimonials say, like, why would I leave this school? Like you
Yeah.
value me. And I'll actually tell you a little culture story. We were leaving the school, and the superintendent and I were walking out. It was at K-12. It was an international school that was K-12. And on the way out, we came across three teachers who we hadn't observed that week because you can only observe, a dozen or so during the course of a week. And all three of them said almost the same thing, and they had the same sort of wistful tone. And they all said something along the lines of, "Oh, I thought you were going to observe me."
Mhm.
So, like, imagine that teachers in essence saying, no fair, I don't get my turn being observed with observations. No one likes being observed. And that's really converting your culture into a culture of trust in 1 week. And it happens because as soon as the first teachers finish getting observed, everyone starts saying, what was it like? And then all of a
Mhm.
sudden, the teachers here, they told me all the things I was good at, and they asked me questions and valued my opinion. And then by the end of the week, teachers want to be observed. That is transforming your culture really literally in a week.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, it doesn't take much. Just having that training and learning how to be, giving that positive feedback and
Yeah,
building
and
the
there's all kinds of
trust.
other little things that we do that build trust along the way because it's very specifically designed for that. But when you
Yeah.
practice it over and over, all of a sudden you got it and you see the teacher's reactions, and that's what
Hmm.
ends up happening.
So, how quickly would you recommend the evaluators or the observers to have these reflective conversations with the staff?
So when we wrote the book, it was really, when I wrote the book, it was really just me based on my own experiences. And so I wrote that the maximum you could sustain is 12 a week. And that doesn't mean you could do it every week because we all know school has crazy built into
Hmm.
it and unexpected things. But as we've been on the road, different schools and different sizes and different settings mean different things. And so we've really transformed our belief on that now. And we say, really, we want to see our teachers once every 3 to 4 weeks. And, in some
Hmm.
settings, that's not as doable as others, but almost every setting, it really, really is. And I know when people are listening to it, they're thinking, but how long a normal observation takes, like a formal observation process. But really, this is a 20-minute unannounced observation. Everything I fill in on that form in the 20 minutes, that's the only time involved. I don't have to
Mhm.
go write anything up afterwards because it's all right there. And then we have a reflective conversation, always the next day, always in the teacher's room, too, by the way, because
Mhm.
they feel safer when it's in their room. And that's usually 15 or 20 minutes, too. So it's not that much time to get in an observation. And
Mhm.
when you're dividing up the observations between all the people that do observations in your building, it's pretty easy to maintain. Not easy. It's manageable, I should say, to maintain that. You have to concentrate and focus on it and build routines so you're doing the same thing all the time and having little
Mhm.
subtle positive accountability pieces built into it help you to get them in, but it's doable. And relationships take time
Mhm.
and they don't happen infrequently. They have to happen to happen regularly if I really want to build that trust. So I can't see you once or twice or three times a year and expect that
Mhm.
relationship to build. But when I can have a reflective conversation with you once every 3 to 4 weeks, man, those 20 minutes that we're spending there, that is real trust building, relationship building
Mhm.
time. And it also helps me to see my teachers, see what they're good at, see what area might do the most to improve that teaching and learning and help their growth all at the same time. And the
Mhm.
teachers feel safer because we've created a safe environment for all that to happen.
Mhm. Mhm. So, what about somebody who is maybe going into a new building or changing roles in the next school year, and
Yeah,
maybe in their previous experience, they had a long list of teachers on their evaluation cycles, and they didn't get to spend a lot of time in classrooms. How would
yeah.
you say would be easier to maybe prioritize getting into classrooms more, or even split up the observations with maybe a teacher coaching or teacher leader team?
And there's lots of different pathways. I never suggest
Okay.
there's just one pathway to do it. And so different schools and in different models, like the UK model has more mid-tier leadership. And so they have their
Yeah.
mid-tier leaders do observations as well. And sometimes instructional coaches are trained in TBO, and some schools have them do that as well. Definitely assistant principals do it. Deans sometimes do it. It really depends on what each school chooses. And sometimes you have to say, okay, 3 to 4 weeks doesn't work for me because my load is too big. So maybe I say it's every 5 to 6 weeks, but even then, that's more than we're traditionally doing it. And so I think we just have to, this is what I'd say is like, I think our number one job as leaders, I mean, safety, obviously, but
Mhm.
beyond that is to improve teaching and learning. And
Yeah.
so then the answer becomes, well, what's the best path to improving teaching and learning?
Hmm.
So the research shows that we've been traditionally observing does not improve teaching and learning. It
Hmm.
shows the way we're traditionally doing professional development does not really improve teaching and learning. And we connect our professional development right to our observations. And we're showing that it does improve teaching and learning. And also something like sometimes our mindset, we think of observations in the way we've traditionally done it and think,
Hmm.
that's not really something I want to do. But then when I do it this new way and see my teachers' responses, and then I'll see them take growth steps as I help them or we work together to grow that in certain areas, it also it becomes fun. And
Hmm.
then what
Hmm.
am I also doing? I am improving my teaching and learning. So I think we also then have to ask, okay, what's on my plate? What's going to have the biggest impact on what my most important job is, improving teaching and learning? And
Hmm.
are there things that are on my plate that might be better served by having somebody else do it? Is there something that my administrative assistant can do? With AI right now, there's things that can get taken off our plate, or we can have assistants in that free up time to spend doing observations, which do
Hmm.
improve teaching and learning. And so I think we have to do an honest analysis of that. When we go out and train schools, we talk to the leaders and we talk about their schedules. And when necessary, we'll go over the schedules with them and say, well, what
Hmm.
about this here? And we'll look at that. But I think that in many ways, the biggest thing is when you see and feel the difference as a leader,
Yeah.
and then it becomes so much easier to get them in.
Hmm. 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 Yeah, so I think it's really delegating. It's finding out who in your building can do these observations based on their role. And then it's also looking at, other tasks that admin assistants can take on. But like you said, it is a priority because that's what improves the teaching and learning the most. But I think a lot of school districts have it wrong, and it's the PD or it's the focus on PLCs or things that might not always function to the best ability when maybe there is a lack of trust, right? Or maybe even a lack of accountability in some cases.
Well, and I think professional development's an important thing, but it's the way we're doing professional
Yeah,
development. Is it a
yeah.
one size fits all? Is like with ours, one of the areas that we do it is we start to know who our in-house experts are. And so when we have just 9 areas of pedagogy, so we have in-house experts be the facilitators each year in one of the
Hmm.
areas of pedagogy, and we give the teachers choice. Which area do you want to work on this year with the goal for everybody to build mastery in that area? And
Hmm.
so, but it's tied directly to observation in the sense that it's tied directly to our lens for observation to end those 9 areas of pedagogy. And
Hmm.
so I think when we change the way we do it, and even in PLCs, like I don't have anything wrong with the foreign PLCs and looking at data. I think that's really great. However, if we're doing that, but we're not doing anything to pedagogically grow our teachers,
Hmm.
looking at data, but then not growing the skills
Sure.
of our teachers isn't going to result in any changes. We've got to work together to build up the capacity of everyone on our faculty that teaches. And that
Yeah.
doesn't happen on its own. So if we're doing PLCs in a silo or PD
Hmm.
in a
Sure.
silo, where everything ought to be connected together
Yeah.
towards growing teachers and looking at PL, and I think looking at it's all good, but it has to work together with the thought of growing teaching at the same time, not just looking at the data.
Hmm. 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 Yeah, that's a good point. So you have a podcast, as I mentioned, 20 Minutes of Teaching Brilliance on the Road with Trust-Based Observations. So talk to me about when you started the podcast, what the goal or the just the interactions, how they are, and then how often do you release episodes?
Yeah, so it like when we're doing these observations, like the sense always traditionally is like I need to find something to fix and tell somebody to fix right away.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
but like I see 20 minutes of teaching one because we'll do 12, 14 schools a week. Of course, I see 20 minutes that are brilliant. And so it's somewhere along the way. I was at a school in the UK and there was a teacher. She had kids, it was a fifth grade math class, and the kids were on the floor. They all had their whiteboards and they were doing problems and they were solving them. And the teacher was asking them to talk about how they solved them. And they'd come up and show how they solved them. And then she would say, well, did anybody else solve it a different way? Fairly, stuff you see. But then she said, well, if you failed, can you tell me how you failed to the class?
Hmm.
And I sort of cringed. But then I saw every kid who got it wrong raise their hand and go, oh, 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 can I
Hmm.
tell you how I failed? And instantly I knew she had created something magical because failure was now opportunity. And then when we had a reflective conversation, what I found out was she had extended that belief, like told everyone else in the school about it. And that became the whole ethos of the whole school as failure is opportunity. And at that point in time, we just clicked like, oh my gosh, there's all this brilliant teaching out there. I need to
Hmm.
find a way to share that so other teachers can learn from each other. And I was gonna thought, oh, I'll turn it into an annual book of all the best teachers. And then I had a buddy said, no, no, turn it into a podcast. And so that's really how it started. So when we're out on the road and we see great teachers, we just tell them how fantastic they were, and we ask them if they'd be willing to be a guest on the podcast. And so we usually start each new season sometime late fall or early winter. I'm a little late this year.
Hmm.
I've got a little backlog, but it'll come out in the next couple weeks starting. And
Hmm.
so they'll drop every week for, 15, 20 weeks or whatever. And then we take summer off. And then we start the new year, and whoever we see, once we see them, we'll start recording and then put them out. It's 20 minutes of teaching brilliance because that's what it
Hmm.
is. On the road with trust-based observations, because that's when I discovered is when we're on the road training schools.
Hmm. And so these are just basically these reflective conversations,
So
post
it's not
observations.
so basically what ends up happening is we observe them, we go over together, we have the reflective
Hmm.
conversation during the training, but then we when we have them on the podcast, we'll kind of go over what happened that day, like
Okay.
ahead of time, and we'll say, look, sort of like you and I did. So let's talk about this and this and this and this. And then we just let it go. And but then sometimes they'll say something, as you probably know, that's really interesting. And you're like, oh, well, let's go with what that says. And just
Hmm.
hoping that other teachers can learn from these people that have got some really good stuff going on.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting because you're interviewing teachers from all over the world that you're working with
Yeah.
in different types of schools. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, international, faith-based, charter,
mhm,
independent, public, all of it. And that's the thing is, no matter where you go around the world, there are amazing teachers in every building you're at.
mhm,
And I might
mhm,
not get to see them all every week because you don't know who you're going to see, but boy, when you see it, you sure want to share it so people can learn from each other.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, so I'll put the link in the show notes. Talk to me about your new book. So you said you have a second edition of Trust-Based Observations coming out at some point, maybe
Yeah,
by
don't
the
have
end of
a date yet.
2026 or
That's my hope. That's my hope.
yeah.
We actually have a four-book series that we're looking at.
Okay.
By volume two, which we're working on now. And then trust-based coaching, like for the coaching cycle, a little bit variant on what's out there because of the trust piece. And then trust-based observations for leaders to observe and support other leaders. There's
Okay.
just nothing really out there that shows like how does a superintendent or assistant superintendent or even how does a principal, observe and support the people around them, and then really just trust-based leadership. And so
Mhm,
but right now it's volume two, and I mean, there's just so much I've learned. Like I'm the guy that developed this, but like I have so many blind spots that every single week when I'm on the road, some trainee will point out something or say something that makes trust-based observations get better. And so
mhm,
it's really been the evolution of all those things. Plus, there's been some just amazing stories of growth along the way. And now we've got those to be able to add in along with everything that we've adapted and grown. And so
mhm,
it's new and expanded and updated, I guess,
mhm,
and better,
mhm.
I think.
Yeah, I mean, you said like you'd worked on the book as you were finishing up working as a principal, right? And now you've learned all this stuff in the years of working with schools. So it's definitely a lot of perspective to reflect on, and things that have maybe changed some of your thinking, but also some of the insight that you've gained.
I mean, the core of it's the same, of course, on trust, but
Hmm.
like people will like one of the areas on the form, I'll just give you an example, is like cognitive load working memory. And we
Okay.
timestamp when the activities that are going on are, and we write them. And then when they do a purposeful little reflection activity, we write the time on there. Well, we have another area in the form, which is like the learning principles, and it's the eight main ways that teachers help students learn. And
Hmm.
maybe in the second year I was on the road, one of the principals said, Craig, why don't you have those eight areas that teachers learn in the cognitive load working memory so you label what each different activity is? And I was like,
Hmm.
oh, that's brilliant. So now we're labeling what the activities are, but then down at the bottom, we've been able to timestamp because when we're spending more time on our active areas like teaching others or learning by doing or pair team work, the research says that's when the most learning. So we can timestamp and then show, hey, look, you spent this much time in this area. And like that's just one example. And it's like, what a brilliant thing that I didn't figure out on my own. Somebody else did that made
Hmm.
trust-based observations more effective.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. So I think we've had a great conversation today around your work with your consultancy, how you guys have learned from some of these schools that you've worked with, and just the piece about um, that reflection, how often these observations should occur, as well as how somebody can really get started with TBO. Out of everything we've talked about today, what's one thing you'd like listeners to remember?
Um, I'm here to listen. So
Hmm.
if you're feeling some frustration with your observations or the teaching and learning, or you've got teachers that you're like, they're just not growing and I want to help them grow, man, I'm happy to just to listen to you talk to me and tell me about what's going on in your building, and if you want to have a discussion about whether that could be something that we could help, great, or if whether I think it is or isn't, I'm happy to tell you. But Man, I know it's frustrating, and sometimes
Mhm.
just having an ear that you can vent to over some of those frustrations can be really helpful. So, we're all about trust. So I want anybody to know it's safe and a trusting place to be able to go ahead and reach out if anybody wants to do that.
Okay, great, great. Well, where can people find you online and connect with you?
Yeah, well, the website is trustbased.com, and they can just, I'm on all the social medias, and usually my handle's at trustbased Craig, but, and my email's Craig at trustbased.com.
Okay, well, I will put those all in the show notes. Thank you so much again for your time and your interest in being on the Out of the Trenches podcast again. And maybe we'll do a third episode when your book comes out or one of the subsequent books
There
in
we
the
go.
series.
Or when I'm in the neighborhood or something, maybe we'll do a live one.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.